then we'll go for it. Oh, well, hello, and thanks for coming out to our first ChatLAANZ presentation or lunchtime session. It's good to get this going again. So today, my name's not Kaaryn, my name's Tiffany, and I'm here with my colleague Kaaryn, and we are from Welltech. So our presentation today is inspired by the theme of the iCALD symposium that's happening later in the year. And so Kaaryn and I we've put our research together to really explore how learning advisors can create inclusive teaching spaces that embrace neurodiversity. So before I tell you what we're going to cover today, I want you to meet Ben. So this is Ben. He is a first-year nursing student at Polytech, and he's booked in an appointment with Kaaryn to help him get started on his first assignment. So you're going to learn about Ben as we move through our presentation. So surrounding that, we're going to talk about our role as learning advisors in supporting Ben, tutors' understandings, teaching practices, and preparedness relating to neurodivergence. And we'll also question our role in supporting tutors when working with neurodivergent learners to help our learners be successful. So we see our role as learning advisors to support all learners who walk through our door. So we help learners like Ben to develop skills to become confident and independent learners. So a significant portion of what we do in our workload involves supporting neurodivergent learners and learners who come with other specific learning challenges. So let's learn a little bit about Ben and what support he needs.
So I had an appointment with Ben. He came to see me with his first summative written assignment. He has done a formative assignment before, and he didn't understand the tutor's feedback, so he brought some of that along too. So while I met with Ben, we had a few chats about things, as you do, and I learned a few things about Ben. I learned that he's creative and imaginative, and he's good at setting goals and planning and managing time. He's very empathetic. He understands other people, notices their needs, very good at seeing the big picture, but also notices fine details as well. He loves arts and nature, and he's acutely aware of the physical and social environments around him. I also learned some other things, that although he's meticulously planned his first assignment, he doesn't know where to start. He's having real trouble actually getting going. He's overthinking, he's overworking it, second-guessing himself. So he's just doesn't know where to start, and that's why he came to see me. He said that he gets overwhelmed by noise and light and other people in the classroom and just feels really, really drained and is exhausted by the end of the day. And he finds that he's having really big emotional reactions. Generally he does, but now that he's started studying, he's finding that that's even more intense. And he really struggles when he's juggling multiple tasks, like, for instance, a couple of written assignments at once and a test coming up. So this is really, really stressing him. He also says that he gets really stressed when he's being observed. So when they do scenarios, he gets really shaky and his hands get sweaty and he can't perform in the way that he normally would. He also feels the same way with exams as well. He's also too really uncomfortable if he gets asked a question in class. He's the kind of lad who likes to think about things. He wants to have a considered answer and finds that if he gets put on the spot to answer in the classroom, he'll blurt something out which may not necessarily be what he meant to say. He also finds that he's taking longer to learn things than other students, and there appears to be an unhelpful narrative starting because he observes that he's slower at learning things and he's asking questions about himself as a learner. So I have a couple of questions here. As a learning advisor, how would you support Ben, and what would you recommend tutors to do to support Ben? So we just welcome a few comments or thoughts from you if you have anything that you'd like to say, or if you want to pop something in the chat, that would be great. So let's go back and look at some of those things that defines Ben. So some of his strengths and some of his challenges. Anyone have any thoughts about, as a learning advisor, how you might support Ben or what you might suggest to tutors in the classroom?
Kia ora, Kaaryn. It's Jessica here. Nice to see
Jessica,
you.
You too.
And thank you for putting on this first ChatLAANZ. I totally agree with Tiffany. It's great to be back into them. Something that just sprung to mind as you were talking, I trained as an ESOL teacher, and one of the things that we learnt was something called think, pair, share. And it speaks to that point about being uncomfortable, put on the spot. Which is also something that students who have English as an additional language find uncomfortable with. So we were always encouraged, rather than asking a student a direct question, pose the question, give them time to think about it by themselves, then give them time to discuss with a partner to kind of test out their ideas, and then open it up to the class. And I think that works really well with all students. So that would be one thing that I would suggest to the tutors or anyone working with students like Ben to employ that strategy, just to give people space to think through their thoughts before they have to share them, in an open forum.
Yeah, that's fabulous. I love that. Thanks, Jessica. Anyone else have any thoughts that they might want to share here? There was a chat came through. Did you see that, Tiffany?
So there are two comments here, one from Diana and one from Kaaryn, and I think they're both looking at building that relationship with student learning services, ideally temporarily, but kind of setting up weekly appointments to caption reassignment planning and progress and so on.
Yeah. Okay, anyone else want to add anything here? We will have time to talk later on too.
I was just reflecting on what Jessica had said, and I'm just wondering, I loved what Jessica said. Thank you for that, Jessica. And I was wondering, practically speaking, would you have some kind of mentor system perhaps, or peer support, or I'm just trying to think practically how that might work for a student like Ben in a student learning service.
So that was really to address Kaaryn's second question about what would you advise tutors in terms of supporting students. So that would be in a classroom setting where they were with their peers.
Yep.
To have that kind of small group discussion before the whole class discussion.
I love that idea, Jessica, because often in classrooms, it's just standard practice, isn't it, to put people on the spot and ask them questions. Yeah. Did I see one more question come into the chat, Tiffany?
Yes, there was one more. So from Leonie, thank you. So Leonie says that sensitive students take in a lot of information, which can be overwhelming, like you've mentioned. And so that regular time to do self-care, to recharge, is a really important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. You're onto it. Okay. So after meeting Ben, I think, what's that?
Sorry, can I just butt in? It's Leela Boyle here. So just to build on the comments about what happens in the classroom, I'm in the statistics department at the University of Auckland, and we do a lot of written feedback. So we use apps so that students can choose to contribute in writing and give them time to do that. So that takes away that fear of verbalizing in the classroom. Very useful for big classes because we have hundreds of students in our classes. And if students don't want to contribute, we don't know. It's all anonymous. We don't know which of them contribute. But we can share what they write with the full class and talk through what they've said. Which I think works, really well for any students with kind of, I guess, neurodiverse issues.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we do is we get plans sent through to us from disability services that specify that we should give students lenience with respect to getting extensions on coursework. So I don't know if your institutions do that, but it just takes that pressure off, particularly when there's a lot of things due at the same time.
Yeah.
It's all from me.
Thank you. That's wonderful. Right. Do we have anything else in the comments there, Tiffany?
I think we probably need to just move on, but yeah.
All right. So I've met with Ben, right? And I think he's neurodivergent. So Ben's in the classroom most of the time, and it's his tutor's responsibilities to support him while he's in the class. So what do educators know about neurodivergence?
Often not a lot.
I think that's fair.
Okay, so this is where my research comes in. So as Kaaryn said, the students in the classroom most of the time. So let's look at what tutors understand about neurodiversity or neurodivergence and supporting neurodivergent learners. So in my master's research, I asked 6 vocational educators in New Zealand about their understandings of neurodiversity and what they know about teaching neurodivergent learners. So what I found was that tutors understand that people experience and interact with the world in different ways. And in a learning environment, that means learners think and process information and learn in different ways. Okay, so tutors strongly associated neurodiversity with learners who have neurologically based diagnoses like autism or dyslexia. So in other words, they were so strongly associating neurodiversity with neurodivergence, which is one portion of our student population. The tutors were only somewhat confident in their understanding of neurodiversity and knew some common characteristics and needs of some of the common diagnoses associated with neurodivergence. So the most frequently, the things that appeared most frequently in the interviews were autism, ADHD, and dyslexia. These quite common ones. So just a point here that when we're talking about neurodiversity, we're referring to all humans, as humans, we are neurodiverse. And also, while by definition neurodivergence relates to learners with diagnoses, here we're looking at neurodivergence but more broadly. So to include learners without diagnoses, but who require certain conditions for their brains to function optimally. So for example, learners with sensory processing sensitivity. My research also found that tutors showed varying levels of confidence in their ability to support some neurodivergent learners. This most frequently looked like tutors changing the fonts or the backgrounds of their PowerPoints for learners with dyslexia, or incorporating frequent breaks for learners with ADHD. So, however, while these tutors use specific strategies for some of their learners, like those ones I've just mentioned, overall, they used a range of teaching strategies in each session that resulted in a catch-all teaching approach. So essentially what they were doing is they did everything in every lesson with the aim of providing something for every learner. So while these are the perspectives of 6 vocational educators, the literature actually mirrors these views. So literature doesn't use the terms neurodiversity or neurodivergence. It is starting to, but it hadn't been. It does look at learning disabilities and other associated terms and how tutors teach these learners. So this is what our tutors understand about neurodiversity or neurodivergence and how they claim to cater for their neurodivergent learners. So let's take a moment and look back at Ben. What do we know about Ben and what does this mean for Ben in the classroom?
Well, I suspect that Ben has sensory processing sensitivity. And that's what we refer to as a highly sensitive person. So some of the background for this is that survival depends on perceiving, processing, and reacting to the environment. And some people are simply more sensitive to internal, external, social, and emotional stimuli than others. They have a supervigilant nervous system. There are genetic, physiological, and evolutionary underpinnings for sensitivity, but the personality or temperamental mechanism is sensory processing sensitivity. And that's the one that we can measure, and the measure of it is the highly sensitive person scale. And we'll give you a link at the end if you're interested to have a look at that. So broadly speaking, 20 to 30% of any animal population is going to have low sensitivity. So we liken them to dandelions. Dandelions don't mind where they live really, and they don't care about the weather so much. They just manage to thrive. 40 to 60% we would call tulips. They're somewhat sensitive to the environment, but generally are able to cope with varying environmental conditions. And 20 to 30% of the population is highly sensitive, and we liken these people to orchids. They need optimal conditions in which to thrive, and when they have them, the results are spectacular. So highly sensitive people are much more impacted by both positive and negative environmental influences. So they will often suffer more negative health outcomes in the presence of negative environments, but also to stand to benefit more from positive environments. For instance, research shows that they're better able to utilize interventions than people who are less sensitive. So some of the hallmarks of sensory processing sensitivity that you might see: deep cognitive functioning is the first thing. So if you imagine an orange sorter with 3 different shapes, small, medium, and large, that would be what the majority of people, how the majority of people might sort information. A highly sensitive person, on the other hand, might have 9 different ones, all right? So oranges are going all over the place, and they can get jammed up because there are all these different holes that they're going down. So the deep cognitive processing also leads to taking time to assess situations, and this is what we saw with Ben, having to think about things before answering. Now, this assessing situations and taking time to weigh up threats and benefits also means a more plastic approach to the environment, whereas those who are less sensitive are likely to have more blanket approach. So high sensitivity also leads to flexibility. Sensitivity to subtle stimuli. So that's noticing when things change. It's being really aware of physical and social cues. So this can lead to overwhelm in physical environments like with light and noise, and we saw that with Ben. And it can also lead to increased noticing of others' needs, which also too feeds into the idea of empathy. They're likely to have heightened emotional responses, big highs, big lows, but in the presence of lows, it can take a long time to get over things, and there might be a lot of rumination in there. And this is where feedback becomes really important. Somebody like Ben needs to get really fair feedback, and tutors need to think very carefully about wording feedback to someone like Ben, because he can take it personally. And these huge emotional responses also lead to increased empathy, which is something that we saw with Ben too. So it's noticing others, noticing what they need, and knowing what needs to be done to help people. But when all of this extra stimulation is going on, it's really easy to become overstimulated, overwhelmed, and need to get away. And that's also what we saw with Ben. He's exhausted by the end of the day, and and he's finding it hard to get stuck into his work at the end of the day because he just needs a rest. So there are some differences in brain functionality between highly sensitive people and others. So if you see here, fMRI evidence shows that there's increased activation in two of the main brain networks, the default mode network and the salience network. So the default mode network is the network that we employ when we're not focusing on anything in particular. So it might be daydreaming, thinking about the past, thinking about the future, and doing things like reflection, planning, assessing, and comparing, as you see there. The salience network, on the other hand, is the brain network that we employ when we need to pay attention. If we took in every piece of stimuli that was coming at us through all our senses, we wouldn't be able to do it. We need to be able to filter out the things that are going to protect us and help us survive. And it's the salience network that does that for us. So with higher activation in the salience network, this is where we see more empathy, theory of mind, and also too long-term memory. And this, of course, has implications for learning. So what are some strategies that we can use to help highly sensitive learners? What does inclusiveness look like for Ben in the classroom? We've talked about how it's necessary to have clear and concise assessment tasks. Without that, he'll be wondering what it is that he needs to do. He'll be overworking, he'll be overthinking, and he won't know where to start. Really important that all teaching staff have the same expectations. Otherwise, if expectations differ, it just leads to anomalies. Someone like Ben won't know what's expected of him. Really important, the assessment tasks match the learning outcomes. And I'm thinking particularly here of not setting a presentation task if presentation isn't one of the learning outcomes. Highly sensitive people can be really, really impacted by having to give presentations. And if it's not necessary, don't do it. And if it is necessary, teach presentation skills. Be available so that students can come and talk and ask questions and seek clarification so that they're not going down rabbit holes or skipping around the garden path trying to figure out what's needed. We've talked about clear and timely feedback, really, really important. So Ben brought his feedback from his formative assignment to go through with me because he wanted to know how to improve for a summative. And be mindful of distractions in the classroom. So this is the physical classroom, like lighting, noise, and other people. So what else can we do or can help Ben in the classroom? Knowledge, knowing about sensory processing sensitivity, knowing that it's a thing, and accepting that we have highly sensitive students. We're going to have, like 1 in 4 of our students or so is likely to be highly sensitive. Look for opportunities to have conversations and observe and ask questions. And a really, really powerful thing can be to ask learners what challenges they have. Don't make assumptions. And often if you ask a question like that, they might come back to you and say something along the lines of, well, it sounds really stupid, but well, it's not stupid if this learner is finding that this thing is impacting them. It's personal. Create a safe classroom space where everyone feels supported and comfortable, and be curious, keep an open mind, ask questions. So if educators are only somewhat familiar with the usual diagnoses like ADHD, dyslexia, autism, how will they be able to know how to support students with unfamiliar presentations like sensory processing sensitivity?
So how prepared are tutors for teaching neurodivergent learners? So generally, tutors in vocational education are industry trained with limited teacher training. And literature and my research findings also reveal that tutors have little to no training in the area of neurodiversity or neurodivergence specifically. There is a requirement that tutors complete the New Zealand certificate in adult tertiary teaching at a minimum. But the participants in my research stated that this certificate did not teach them anything about neurodiversity or neurodivergent. So this shows a gap in their training. And on a side note, the educators only learnt about neurodivergence because they were interested in it. And this was done through self-directed learning if they had the time to do that at all. So I also found that tutors' preparedness in teaching neurodivergent learners came from their professional experiences in the classroom, as in they learnt about ADHD from specific learners in the classroom who have ADHD. So while this is a good starting point, there is a problem here. And that is that not all learners with ADHD share the same characteristics, nor do they experience their ADHD in the same way. So tutors only learning through their experiences with learners, that's quite limiting. So if tutor training is limited, how can they learn more about neurodivergence? And so they do receive, in some cases, support from our disability advisors. But also, as learning advisors, generally, we have more experience with neurodivergent learners and knowledge about neurodivergence compared to some tutors. And so this may mean that tutors would benefit from some more support from us, which in turn could better support our neurodivergent learners. But this brings up a question, and that is, how much responsibility do we have as learning advisors to support our tutors? And this is in relation to enhancing tutors' understanding of neurodivergence and the teaching practices relating to neurodivergent learners. Now, if this was part of our responsibilities or within our scope of practice, we also then want to consider what is it that we need to be able to do this, so to be able to support tutors in this way. So we're interested in some discussion here if you have some things to share. So we'll open the floor for a short time. Kaaryn will lead that conversation and I'll keep an eye on the chat. So yeah, feel free to share.
Do we think that we have responsibility to support tutors? I guess maybe we could just look at that first question.
From my perspective, yes, and I spend a lot of time doing this.
Yeah.
Because often, so we're a bit of a satellite campus, so often we have tutors who are, there's only one or two of them teaching their program on this site, so their relationship is actually quite close with us. We're their support people, and often we're there, you know, gosh, I've got a student who's struggling with this, or it appears that, what do you think? So those conversations start, and then we start to give them some suggestions and some ideas in terms of their teaching practice, similar to what you've been outlining. So I think we do have responsibility to do that. Whether we have the time is another question.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. Absolutely. Does anyone else have any thoughts around that first question?
So I have a comment here in the chat, Kaaryn. It says, when I think about the employment model, the way that we know we should be doing the work we do does not match what our employers think we should be doing. Yeah.
Yeah, Tiffany and I were just talking about that yesterday and this morning. Yeah. So, yeah. So I don't know. How does anyone get around that sort of mismatch?
We just go for it anyway. We just do what needs to be done, and get, you know, we fight the other battles some other way. But in the meantime, what matters is that our students' needs are met.
Yeah.
So if that means liaison with their tutors, I mean, those relationships matter anyway. So that's part of what we do already, because we know that's how we're going to be the best practitioners that we could be, is by doing the job well, which and that's why we're here, is because we love our work and we love being able to make a difference for students. And people who like to be able to make a difference for students also like to be able to make a difference, I think, for tutors as well, because it's part of being a family, I guess. And so even though there is a disconnect, we still do it.
Yeah.
Yes, eloquently said, Catherine. Absolutely. So what do we think that we need to be able to do to support tutors? Or what do we need to be able to do this? Sorry.
Yeah, and I think this question is partly acknowledging that not all of us know a lot about neurodivergence, and maybe some of us need to learn a little bit more too. Yeah, so what is it that you feel you might need?
More of this kind of session for us as a community. I think, you know, I mean, I think that's brilliant. And you know, and we need to be having these conversations and talking about it, and taking these conversations that we're having in this setting, in this space, and taking them to our colleagues and taking them to committee meetings, and you know, and just
sharing. Yeah, absolutely. So I guess some of the things that we could do is join or start neurodiversity community of practice, as they have down at Otago Polytech. Attend courses and workshops, and maybe even complete a dyslexia screening or an ADHD self-test, or the sensory processing sensitivity test online. And we'll have a link at the end here if you're keen or interested to go and check that one out. Speak with those neurodivergent learners. Ask that question, what is it that gets in the way? What do you need? And, you know, listen with an open mind and an open heart, and speak with the disability advisors as well. Yeah.
Mouse isn't doing its thing. Here we go. Okay, so in the case that learning advisors do support tutors and upskilling in this area, which it sounds like people are already kind of doing a little bit of that, how can we do this? So firstly, we want to acknowledge that there can be some challenges when working with tutors. So here are some examples from anecdotal evidence, things that we've actually heard from tutors themselves, is that some may not think it is important to learn about neurodivergence. Some may already feel competent or confident in supporting their learners, and some may feel uncomfortable working with us learning advisors. There are always those other issues of lack of time. When do we actually find the time to do this? But that aside, how can we create these opportunities? How can learning advisors work with tutors to help them support neurodivergent learners? So we consider a couple of ideas useful here. We can build awareness among tutors that learning advisors also work with tutors. We don't just work with students. So that's our main group of clients. We can employ a considered approach when we are working with our tutors, an approach that doesn't threaten them or their expertise, because we know that they do come with knowledge and experience. And we can work collaboratively with them, and we can use each other's experience. And we also want to ensure that our interactions with tutors are based on their needs, and we're not making assumptions that we know what their needs are in this area. So if you have any other suggestions, we'd love to see those in the chat. But our aim of doing this, really, working with tutors in these ways, is that it will have a flow-on effect and ultimately benefit not only our neurodivergent learners, but all of our learners.
So what could a future look like for Ben and students like him? Education is key. Unless we know about it, we can't do anything about it. So that's institutional, it's sector. And I'd like to see tutors understand sensitivity and be able to work with highly sensitive students to harness their superpowers. So we'd like to see teaching that supports our neurodivergent learners. What do they need? classrooms where neurodiversity is normalised, where we understand that all of us are different and we all have different needs and we all have different strengths and we all have different challenges, and it's all okay. So it's back to that question again. What is it you need? What's getting in the way? How can we help? Like to see tutors encourage students or learners to show knowledge in ways that best suits them. So not all of our learners will be good at either writing or presenting or whatever, and perhaps we could be, or tutors or institutions could be a bit more flexible with having students show their learnings in different ways. We've talked about how important it is to have the assignment tasks and course material watertight and clear and concise. And we've talked about the need for feedback. So I'd like to see tutors getting feedback back to students in plenty of time so that they have time to take on board the feedback and improve for their next assignment. And I'd like to see teaching staff remain curious and adaptable and open to ideas. And if such things are part of everyday best practice, then Ben and other neurodivergent learners will feel more understood and supported and better able to thrive and succeed in their education journey. So thank you, that's us. Ellie, how much time? We probably don't have very much time, do we?
It's 10 till 1.
Oh yeah.
So
10
there is a
to-
little time if any of you have questions. We're open to take some of those. We'll have some discussion.
Yeah, thoughts. Any thoughts you might have,
I'll just stop sharing.
or anything that comes up as a result of this chat.